So let me get this straight, Captain Derek Vasquez said, leaning back in his chair with the kind of casual confidence that made diplomatic protocols weep. You're telling me that your entire species considers us the scary ones? The Kitheran across from him, all 8 feet of chitinous nightmare fuel with claws that could probably open a can of beans or a human torso with equal efficiency, shifted uncomfortably. Which, considering he was basically a walking tank crossed with a praying mantis and a bad attitude, was saying something. Captain Vasquez, Ambassador Thector replied, his voice carrying that lovely synthesized quality that suggested his vocal cords were more like industrial machinery. Your reputation precedes you. Does it now? Derek grinned, the kind of grin that had gotten him in trouble with 3 different alien species, 2 human admirals, and 1 particularly vindictive space station AI. And what exactly does my reputation say? Now, you might be thinking this is where our brave human captain gets all cocky and starts flexing about humanity's military prowess or something equally testosterone-fueled. But Derek Vasquez wasn't your typical space marine stereotype. He was something far more dangerous, a human being who found the entire situation genuinely amusing. It says, Thector continued, and if Derek wasn't mistaken, there was actual nervousness in that mechanical voice, that you once stared down a Zarathi dreadnought until its captain surrendered. Oh, that. Derek waved a hand dismissively. That wasn't staring them down. I was just really bored. Do you know how long diplomatic negotiations take when everyone's trying not to accidentally start a war? I think I fell asleep with my eyes open at one point. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that occurs when someone's entire worldview takes a hard left turn into a brick wall. You fell asleep? Thector's compound eyes, yes, compound eyes, because apparently evolution had decided to go full nightmare mode with these guys, flickered in what Derek was starting to recognize as confusion. Look, Thec, can I call you Thec, Ambassador? Thector is a mouthful, and I'm pretty sure I'm butchering the pronunciation anyway. The thing about humans is that we're really not as scary as everyone seems to think we are. This was, of course, a complete lie. Humans were absolutely terrifying, but not for the reasons most aliens assumed. Most species looked at humanity's military history, their tendency to solve problems by hitting them harder, their bizarre ability to survive things that should by all rights kill them, and came to the entirely reasonable conclusion that humans were apex predators who'd somehow figured out space travel. What they missed was the far more disturbing truth. Humans were apex predators who'd figured out space travel and then gotten bored. Captain, Thector said slowly, our intelligence reports indicate that your species regularly engages in activities that would be considered suicidal by any rational standard. Like what? You jump out of perfectly functional aircraft for entertainment. Derek blinked. Skydiving. That's your evidence that we're a death world species? You deliberately throw yourselves off cliffs attached to fabric wings. Hang gliding is very relaxing, actually. You consume toxins for recreational purposes. Hey now, alcohol isn't a toxin. It's a social lubricant. Very different thing. Derek paused, though I suppose the line gets a bit blurry after the 3rd shot of Centauri whiskey. Thector's head tilted in a way that was probably meant to convey incredulity, but mostly just made him look like a very large, very confused insect. Captain, your species' idea of recreation includes activities that have significant mortality rates. So does crossing the street. Doesn't make us death world psychopaths. Derek leaned forward, his expression shifting to something that might have been genuine curiosity if you squinted. What I want to know is why you're so convinced we're the dangerous ones in this conversation. Now this was where things got interesting. See, the Cathara weren't exactly what you'd call a peaceful species. They were what happened when evolution decided that regular predators weren't quite terrifying enough and needed more limbs, better armor, and the ability to bite through titanium alloy. Their homeworld was basically Australia's evil twin, if Australia had been designed by someone with a serious grudge against anything that breathed. But here was Thector, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy than sitting across from one moderately amused human. Captain Vasquez, Thector began, then stopped. Started again. Derek, may I call you Derek? Sure thing, Thec. Derek, has anyone ever explained to you what a death world classification actually means? Derek shrugged. Death, world, pretty self-explanatory. Planets where everything tries to kill you, right? That is partially correct. Thector's claws tapped against the table in what Derek was beginning to suspect was a nervous habit. A death world is classified as such when the environmental pressures are so extreme that they produce species with abnormal resilience, adaptability, and... He paused, searching for the right word. Creativity in survival strategies. Creativity? Derek, most species evolve in relatively stable environments. Predators hunt prey, prey develops defenses, predators adapt, and so on. It's a balanced system that produces logical evolutionary paths. Derek nodded along, though he was starting to get the feeling that this conversation was heading somewhere he wasn't going to particularly enjoy. Death worlds, Thector continued, are different. Their environments so hostile, so unpredictable, that traditional evolutionary strategies don't work. Instead, they produce species that are improvisational. And there it was. The word that made every sensible alien species break out in cold sweats whenever humans were mentioned. Improvisational. You see, Derek, when the Galactic Council first encountered humanity, we spent a considerable amount of time studying your species' history. We were particularly interested in your military conflicts. Yeah, we've had a few of those, Derek admitted. Humans aren't great at the whole getting along thing sometimes. That's not what concerned us. Derek raised an eyebrow. No? What concerned us was how you fought them. Now, Derek had been in enough briefings to know where this was probably going, but he decided to play along. And how do we fight them? Incorrectly. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. I'm sorry, what? Thector's claws stopped tapping. Derek, military strategy is a science. There are optimal approaches, established tactics, proven methodologies. Every species in the galaxy follows these principles because they work. Except humans. Except humans. Thector's voice carried the kind of weary resignation usually reserved for discussing natural disasters or tax codes. Humans look at established military doctrine and ask, but what if we did something completely insane instead? Derek couldn't help himself. He started laughing. Okay, I'll give you that one. We do tend to think outside the box. Derek, you don't think outside the box. You completely ignore the existence of the box and then somehow convince the box to work for you instead. This was true, though Derek had never really thought about it in quite those terms. Humans did have a tendency to approach problems from angles that other species found unsettling. Take your Second World War, Thector continued, apparently warming to his theme. The Pacific Theater, specifically. Derek settled back in his chair. This should be good. The Japanese had established what was, by all military standards, an impregnable defensive position. Island fortresses, overlapping fields of fire, supply lines protected by the most powerful navy in the region. Any sensible species would have recognized the futility of a direct assault and negotiated a settlement. But we didn't. But you didn't. Instead, your species developed an entirely new form of warfare. You built floating military bases and used them to bypass every single defensive advantage your enemy possessed. Aircraft carriers are pretty neat, Derek agreed. Derek, you built airports that could move. When you put it like that, it does sound kind of crazy. It doesn't sound crazy, Derek. It sounds impossible. And yet your species made it work. Thector leaned forward, his compound eyes fixed on Derek with an intensity that was probably meant to be intimidating. Do you understand what that means to the rest of the galaxy? Derek considered this. That we're creative problem solvers? That you're completely unpredictable? Derek, military strategy depends on being able to anticipate your opponent's actions. But humans... Thector made a sound that might have been the Ketheran equivalent of a sigh. Humans do things that shouldn't work, and then they work anyway. There was a pause while Derek processed this. So you're afraid of us because we're too creative? Among other things, yes. What are the other things? Thector's claws resumed their nervous tapping. Would you like the comprehensive list or the abbreviated version? Let's go with the highlights. Very well. Your species has a documented tendency to form emotional attachments to your military equipment. Derek blinked. Come again? You name your weapons, your vehicles, your ships. You treat them as if they have personalities. Well, yeah, but that's just... Derek, the ship that brought you here. What do you call it? The Tenacious. And do you think of the Tenacious as it or she? Derek opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. Point to Thector. Furthermore, the Ketheran continued, your species has an alarming tendency to continue fighting long past the point where surrender would be the rational choice. We're persistent. Derek, your historical records include multiple instances of humans fighting to the last individual rather than surrender, even when defeat was inevitable. Sometimes principles matter more than survival. And there it was. The thing that made every alien species in the galaxy nervous when dealing with humans. It wasn't the technology, or the weapons, or even the creative tactical thinking. It was the fact that humans would rather die than give up. Most species, when faced with overwhelming odds, would surrender. It was logical, rational, and sensible. Live to fight another day, as the saying went. Humans, on the other hand, had a disturbing tendency to decide that some things were worth dying for. And once they made that decision, they became absolutely relentless. "Thek," Derek said quietly, "is that what this is about? You're worried that we might decide you're worth fighting?" The Kitharan's silence was answer enough. Derek leaned back in his chair, suddenly understanding the real purpose of this meeting. This isn't a diplomatic negotiation, is it? This is a threat assessment. The Galactic Council is concerned about humanity's expansion into our sector of space. And they sent you to figure out if we're planning to invade? They sent me to determine whether coexistence is possible. Derek laughed, but it wasn't entirely humor. "Thek, buddy, I hate to break it to you, but humanity is way too lazy for galactic conquest." Lazy? Think about it. Conquering the galaxy would involve an enormous amount of paperwork, logistics coordination, and administrative oversight. Do you know how much humans hate paperwork? Thektor's head tilted again. This is not the response I was expecting. What were you expecting? Threats. Posturing. Demonstrations of military superiority. Derek shook his head. Thek, the thing about humans is that we only get genuinely scary when someone threatens something we care about. The rest of the time, we're mostly just trying to figure out what to have for lunch and whether our favorite sports team is going to screw up this season's playoffs. But our military exists because other humans occasionally do stupid things, and someone needs to be ready to tell them to knock it off. It's not like we're sitting around plotting galactic domination. That would require long-term planning, and humans are terrible at long-term planning. Thektor was quiet for a long moment. Derek, your species went from first flight to moon landing in less than 70 years. Yeah, but that was mostly because we were showing off for the Russians. Competition makes humans do weird things. You terraformed Mars. We got bored, and Mars was right there, looking all red and uninhabited. It was basically asking for it. You developed faster than light travel in less than a century. Derek grinned. Okay, that one was actually an accident. We were trying to build a really big particle accelerator, and Dr. Elena Rodriguez forgot to carry the 2 in her calculations. Next thing you know, we accidentally punched a hole in space-time and figured out how to make it useful. You discovered FTL travel by accident? Best kind of discovery. No preconceived notions to get in the way. Thektor was staring at him now with the kind of expression that suggested his worldview was undergoing some serious structural damage. Derek, he said slowly, do you understand why the other species in the galaxy find humanity terrifying? Because we're unpredictable and too stubborn to die properly? Because you're a species of barely controlled chaos that somehow makes everything work out anyway? Thektor's claws had stopped tapping entirely. Derek, most species spend millennia developing technologies that humans invent accidentally, while trying to solve completely unrelated problems. We're efficient that way. You're impossible that way. Derek considered this. Thek, can I ask you something? Of course. What's your homeworld like? The change in subject seemed to catch Thektor off guard. Kithara Prime? It's challenging. High gravity, extreme temperature variations, atmospheric composition that would be toxic to most species. The wildlife is uniformly hostile, and the plant life is largely carnivorous. Sounds rough. It is. Survival requires constant vigilance, careful planning, and adherence to proven strategies. There is no room for improvisation. Derek nodded slowly. And that's why you guys are so good at military strategy, right? Because your entire evolutionary history is based on following the rules and doing what works? Correct. But it's also why you're afraid of humans. Thektor's compound eyes flickered. I wouldn't say afraid. Thek, buddy, you're terrified. And I get it, I really do. From your perspective, humans must look like the universe's idea of a practical joke. We break all the rules and somehow come out ahead anyway. The galaxy has rules for a reason, Derek. Sure it does. But sometimes the rules don't account for new situations. That's when you need someone who's willing to try something that probably shouldn't work. Derek stood up and walked over to the viewport, looking out at the stars. You know what I think the real problem is? What? I think you're looking at this whole situation backwards. Thektor's head tilted. How so? You're so focused on the fact that humans are unpredictable that you're missing the important part. Which is? Derek turned back to face the Kitharan. We're on the same side. Derek, your species has been expanding into our territory. Our territory? Thek, space is really, really big. Like, stupidly big. There's enough room out here for everyone to have their own galaxy if they want it. The resources are effectively infinite. Do you know how much raw material is floating around in asteroid belts alone? We could build 1,000 civilizations and barely make a dent in what's available. Thector was quiet for a moment. Then why are you expanding in our direction? Derek grinned. Because you guys sent us the most interesting diplomatic message we'd ever received. Interesting? Thek, most first contact scenarios go something like, "Greetings, we come in peace, please don't shoot us." Your people sent us a 47-page analysis of our military capabilities, followed by a polite request for a meeting to discuss mutual non-interference protocols. That seemed appropriate given your species' reputation. It was fascinating. We'd never encountered a species that was simultaneously afraid of us and confident enough to demand a formal negotiation. Usually it's one or the other. Derek sat back down, leaning forward with genuine interest. Thek, tell me about your military doctrine. I'm not sure that's appropriate to discuss. Not the classified stuff, just the general philosophy. Thector considered this. Kytheran military strategy is based on overwhelming superiority in every engagement. We analyze the enemy's capabilities, develop countermeasures, and deploy forces sufficient to guarantee victory with minimal losses. That's actually pretty smart. It's logical. It's also exactly the opposite of how humans fight. Yes, we noticed that. Derek laughed. Thek, do you want to know the secret of human military strategy? I'm not sure I want to know. We make it up as we go along. Thector's claws resumed their nervous tapping. That's not a strategy. Sure it is. It's just a really flexible one. Derek, you can't plan for every contingency by not planning at all. Why not? Planning assumes you know what's going to happen, but battles are chaotic. The moment contact is made with the enemy, every plan falls apart anyway. So humans simply adapt? We improvise, overcome, and adapt. Sometimes in that order, sometimes not. Thector was quiet for a long moment. Derek, do you understand why that terrifies other species? Because it's not logical? Because it works. Derek considered this. Yeah, I can see how that would be unsettling. Unsettling is one word for it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Derek spoke up. Thek, can I make a suggestion? What? Instead of trying to figure out how to avoid each other, why don't we try working together? Thector's compound eyes flickered. I'm not sure our species are compatible for cooperation. Why not? Your people are great at planning and strategy. Humans are good at dealing with unexpected situations. Seems like a pretty good combination to me. The Galactic Council is unlikely to approve such an arrangement. What's the Galactic Council going to do? Tell us we can't be friends? They might try to prevent it. Derek's grin turned predatory. Thek, buddy, the one thing guaranteed to make humans do something is telling them they can't do it. That's what we're afraid of. No, that's what you should be hoping for. Thector's head tilted in confusion. I don't understand. Derek leaned back in his chair. Thek, let me tell you about human psychology. We're social creatures. We like making friends. We especially like making friends with people who other people tell us we shouldn't be friends with. That seems contrary to survival instincts. Welcome to humanity. We specialize in things that seem contrary to survival instincts. Derek stood up again, this time extending his hand toward Thector. So, what do you say? Want to be the alien species that figured out how to work with humans instead of against them? Thector stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Derek, if I accept this proposal, it could fundamentally alter the balance of power in this sector of the galaxy. Yeah, probably. The other species will be concerned. Let them be concerned. You know what's scarier than one Death World species? What? 2 Death World species who like each other. Thector's claws stopped tapping entirely. That's actually a compelling point. I thought you might see it that way. Slowly, carefully, Thector reached out and grasped Derek's hand with one of his claws. The handshake was probably the most diplomatically significant moment in either species' history, but Derek couldn't help thinking it looked like a scene from the galaxy's weirdest buddy cop movie. Derek, Thector said, I believe this arrangement could be mutually beneficial. I think so too, Thek. However, I should warn you that my people will want to test this partnership before fully committing to it. Derek raised an eyebrow. What kind of test? There's a situation developing in the Rigel sector. Pirates have been attacking shipping lanes, and the local authorities have been unable to stop them. And? The Galactic Council has decided that this would be an appropriate mission for joint operations. Derek's grin widened. They want to see if we can work together without accidentally starting a war. Something like that, yes. Thick, buddy, you just made my day. Do you know how boring diplomatic meetings are? I've been sitting in conferences for 3 months straight. A little pirate hunting sounds like exactly what I need. Thector's compound eyes flickered in what Derek was learning to recognize as amusement. Derek, these aren't ordinary pirates. They're heavily armed, well-organized, and they've been operating with impunity for over a year. Even better. I was starting to think this job was going to be all paperwork and protocol meetings. You're looking forward to this. Thek, I'm a soldier who's been pretending to be a diplomat for 3 months. The chance to actually do something that doesn't involve committee meetings and formal dinner parties? Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Thector made that sound that might have been a sigh. Derek, I'm beginning to understand why other species find humans disconcerting. We're an acquired taste. Indeed. Derek walked back over to the viewport, looking out at the stars with renewed interest. So, when do we leave? The mission briefing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Both of our ships will be involved, along with support vessels from the Galactic Council. Joint command structure? That remains to be determined. Derek chuckled. Thek, let me give you some free advice about working with humans. What's that? Don't try to command us. We don't respond well to orders from people we don't trust. And how does one earn the trust of humans? Be willing to fight alongside us. Nothing builds trust like shared danger. Thector considered this. That seems inefficient. Maybe, but it works. Besides, if we're going to be partners, we need to know we can count on each other when things get messy. And you believe they will get messy? Derek turned back to face the Kitharin, his expression shifting to something more serious. Thek, in my experience, things always get messy. The question is whether you're ready for it when they do. And humans are always ready. We're never ready, but we're always willing to figure it out as we go. Thector's claws tapped once against the table. Derek, I believe this partnership is going to be more interesting than either of our species anticipated. I hope so. Boring partnerships don't usually last very long. No, I suppose they don't. Derek extended his hand again. Partners? Partners. They shook hands again, and Derek couldn't help but think that this was either the beginning of a beautiful friendship or the start of the galaxy's most spectacular diplomatic disaster. Knowing humans, it would probably be both. 3 days later, Derek was standing on the bridge of the Tenacious, watching a dozen pirate ships attempt to flee from what had to be the most lopsided battle in recent memory. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Brooks called from the tactical station. The Kytherin ships are requesting permission to pursue the fleeing vessels. Derek looked at the tactical display, where Thector's battle group was maintaining perfect formation, while systematically dismantling the pirate fleet's defensive positions. It was like watching a masterclass in military precision. Tell them they're cleared to pursue, but leave the command ship for us. Sir? Derek grinned. Brooks, we're about to show our new friends why humans have a reputation for being unpredictable. What did you have in mind, sir? Something that probably shouldn't work. Derek activated the ship's intercom. All hands, this is the captain. We're about to attempt a boarding action on a moving vessel while both ships are maneuvering at combat speed. This is either going to be really cool or really embarrassing, and possibly both. Engineering, I need you to do something creative with the gravity plating. Marines, get ready to earn your hazard pay. Lieutenant Commander Brooks looked at him with the expression of someone who was beginning to understand why aliens found humans concerning. Sir, boarding actions are typically conducted after the target vessel has been disabled. Typically, yes. But their engines are still online, which means they're going to try to run. And I'd rather not spend the next 6 hours chasing them across the system. So we're going to board them while they're trying to escape? We're going to board them because they're trying to escape. Thector's people can handle the other ships, but I want to have a conversation with whoever's running this operation. Derek activated the tactical display, studying the pirate command ship's configuration. Brooks, what do you think? Docking maneuver or forced entry? Sir, the docking maneuver would be safer. But forced entry would be faster. Yes, sir. And more impressive? Significantly more impressive, sir. Derek nodded. Forced entry it is. Signal the Marines to prepare for vacuum operations. On the tactical display, Derek could see the Catharan ships methodically working their way through the pirate fleet. Thektor's people fought like they did everything else, with careful planning, overwhelming force, and flawless execution. It was actually kind of beautiful to watch. The human approach was going to be different. "Captain," the communications officer called. "We're receiving a transmission from the pirate command ship." "Put it through." The main screen flickered, revealing a scarred human face that looked like it had been having a very bad day. "This is Captain Morrison of the Free Trader Liberty."
"We surrender! Repeat, we surrender!"
Derek raised an eyebrow. "Captain Morrison, this is Captain Vasquez of the UES Tenacious. You're not a free trader." "We're not pirates either." "Morrison, you were caught attacking civilian shipping. That makes you pirates." "Look, Captain, we can work this out. We've got information you might be interested in." Derek glanced at Brooks, who shook his head. "Classic pirate negotiation tactics. Claim to have valuable information in exchange for lenient treatment." "What kind of information, Morrison?" "The kind that explains why a bunch of human traders suddenly decided to start attacking ships in Galactic Council space." That was interesting. Derek had been wondering about that himself. Most human pirates stuck to the Outer Rim territories where law enforcement was spotty, and the pickings were easy. Operating in Council space was dangerous and unprofitable. "I'm listening." "Not over an open channel. You want to know what's really going on here, you'll have to come aboard." Derek looked at the tactical display. Morrison's ship was definitely trying to run, but they were keeping their weapons powered down and their shields at minimum. Either they were genuinely surrendering, or they were setting up for something clever. "Brooks, what's your assessment?" "Could be a trap, sir. But if they were planning something, they'd probably want us to dock normally. Inviting us aboard when we're obviously planning a forced boarding suggests they're either desperate or genuinely trying to cooperate." Derek nodded. "Thektor's people have the rest of the fleet handled. Let's go see what Captain Morrison has to say." "Sir, are you planning to lead the boarding party personally?" "Of course I am." "This is the interesting part." Brooks sighed. "Sir, regulations state that ship commanders should not personally lead boarding actions unless absolutely necessary." "Brooks, the regulations also state that ship commanders should avoid actions that are reckless, unnecessary, or likely to result in diplomatic incidents. Since I've already violated 2 out of 3, I might as well go for the hat trick." "Yes, sir." Derek activated the intercom again. "Marines, this is the captain. Change of plans. We're going to dock normally and conduct a civilized boarding action. Try not to shoot anyone unless they shoot first." He switched to the communications channel. "Morrison, we're coming aboard. Keep your people calm and your weapons holstered, and this will go smoothly for everyone." "Understood, Captain. We'll be waiting." Derek turned to Brooks. "You have the con. If this goes badly, don't try to rescue me. Just signal Thektor and let the Cathara handle it." "Sir." "That's an order, Brooks. Our new friends are watching, and I'd rather not give them the impression that humans are reckless." "Sir, you're about to board a pirate ship with minimal backup to have a conversation with someone who may be trying to kill you. If that's not reckless, what is?" Derek grinned. "Brooks, that's not reckless. That's Tuesday." 20 minutes later, Derek was standing in the cargo bay of Morrison's ship, surrounded by 3 Marines and face-to-face with the most reluctant pirate captain he'd ever met. Morrison was younger than he'd appeared on screen, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was in way over his head. His crew looked like traders, not pirates, scared, confused, and very much wishing they were somewhere else. "Captain Morrison," Derek said, "you have 5 minutes to convince me not to arrest all of you." "Captain Vasquez, my crew and I aren't pirates. We're refugees." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Refugees from what?" "From whoever's been hunting human settlements in the Outer Rim territories." That was definitely not what Derek had been expecting to hear. "Explain." Morrison gestured to his crew. 3 months ago, we were running supplies between the mining colonies in the Kepler sector. Normal trade routes, legitimate cargo, proper documentation. Then the attacks started." "What kind of attacks?" "Unknown ships, no identification, no communication. They'd hit a settlement, take whatever they wanted, and disappear. But they weren't random attacks, Captain. They were systematic." Derek frowned. "Systematic how?" "They were targeting human settlements specifically. Mixed colonies, places where humans lived alongside other species, they left alone. But purely human settlements?" Morrison shook his head. "They hit every single one." "And you think this is connected to your piracy activities? How?" Morrison's expression hardened. "Because when we tried to report it to the Galactic Council, they told us that human expansion into the Outer Rim was destabilizing the region, and that they couldn't provide protection for illegal settlements." Derek's frown deepened. Were the settlements illegal? Some of them, yeah, but most were legitimate colonies that had been operating for years. The council just decided they didn't want humans expanding into that sector anymore. So you turned to piracy. We turned to survival. Morrison's voice carried the kind of bitter anger that suggested he'd had this conversation with himself many times. We couldn't go back to our homes because they'd been destroyed. We couldn't get help from the council because they'd written us off. And we couldn't survive as traders because whoever was attacking the settlements was also hitting supply ships. Derek looked around at Morrison's crew. They looked like exactly what Morrison had claimed. Desperate people who'd been backed into a corner and had made some very bad decisions as a result. But something about the story didn't add up. Morrison, if you were just trying to survive, why were you attacking council ships? That's about the stupidest possible way to stay under the radar. Morrison's expression shifted to something that might have been embarrassment. Because we're idiots who thought we could force the council to pay attention to what was happening in the Outer Rim. By attacking their shipping? By making it impossible for them to ignore us. We figured if we caused enough trouble, they'd have to investigate. Derek stared at him. You turned to piracy as a form of protest? It seemed like a good idea at the time. Derek looked at his Marines, who were doing their best to maintain professional composure despite the fact that they were probably thinking the same thing he was. Only humans would be stupid enough to become pirates in order to get the authorities to investigate crimes against them. Morrison, do you have any proof of these attacks on human settlements? We've got sensor logs, survivor testimonies, shipping records showing the disruption in trade routes. Everything's on our computer core. Derek activated his communicator. Tenacious, this is the captain. I need a data analysis team over here to examine some evidence. Acknowledged, Captain. Should we also send additional security? Derek looked around at Morrison's crew, who were watching him with the kind of hopeful desperation that suggested they were telling the truth. Negative. These people aren't dangerous. They're just really, really bad at making good life choices. Understood, sir. Derek turned back to Morrison. Assuming your story checks out, what exactly are you hoping I can do about it? Help us find out who's behind the attacks, and maybe convince the Galactic Council that humans aren't the problem in the Outer Rim. Morrison, even if I believe your story, and I'm not saying I do, you and your crew still committed acts of piracy against civilian shipping. That's a crime regardless of your motivations. We know. Morrison's shoulders slumped. Captain, we're not asking you to ignore what we've done. We're asking you to help us make sure it meant something. Derek considered this. The logical thing to do would be to arrest Morrison and his crew, confiscate their ship, and let the legal system sort everything out. It was clean, simple, and exactly what regulations required. It was also exactly the kind of by-the-book thinking that had gotten these people into this mess in the first place. Morrison, I'm going to make you a deal. What kind of deal? You're going to help me investigate these attacks on human settlements. In exchange, I'll make sure the council knows that you cooperated with the investigation. Morrison blinked. That's it? That's it. You'll still face charges for the piracy, but cooperation goes a long way in determining sentences. And if we find out who's behind the attacks? Derek's expression hardened. Then we're going to have a conversation with them about picking on human settlements. Morrison looked at his crew, who were nodding eagerly. Captain Vasquez, you've got a deal. Derek activated his communicator again. Tenacious, patch me through to Ambassador Thector. Connection established, Captain. Thec, it's Derek. How are you doing with the rest of the pirate fleet? Thector's synthesized voice carried a note of satisfaction. The remaining vessels have been secured. No casualties among council forces. Minimal damage to the pirate ships. Outstanding. Thec, I need to talk to you about something. Can you come aboard Morrison's ship? Is there a problem, Derek? Not a problem, exactly. More like a complication. There was a pause. Derek, when humans say complication, other species tend to interpret that as impending disaster. This is more of a mystery than a disaster, I think. You think? I'll explain when you get here. 20 minutes later, Derek was standing in Morrison's cargo bay with Thector, watching the Catharan ambassador examine the sensor logs that Morrison's crew had provided. Derek, Thector said finally, these readings are unusual. Unusual how? The attacking ships appear to be using weapons technology that isn't in our databases. Derek frowned. Unknown technology? Not unknown. Unregistered. The energy signatures are consistent with several different species' weapon systems, but the specific configurations don't match any known vessels. Morrison stepped forward. Ambassador, we tried to tell the council that something strange was going on, but they wouldn't listen. Thector's compound eyes focused on Morrison with the kind of attention that probably made the human very uncomfortable. Captain Morrison, the Galactic Council receives thousands of reports of unusual activity every year. Most of them turn out to be misidentified phenomena or equipment malfunctions. But not all of them, Derek interjected. No, not all of them. Derek looked at the sensor data again. Thec, what's your professional assessment? Is this worth investigating? Thector was quiet for a long moment. Derek, if these readings are accurate, then someone has been systematically attacking human settlements using modified weapons from multiple species. That suggests a level of coordination and planning that is concerning. Concerning how? Concerning because it implies that the attacks aren't random piracy or territorial disputes. They're targeted operations. Derek felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. Targeted at humans specifically. Yes. Morrison cleared his throat. Captains, there's something else. The attacks weren't just hitting settlements. They were also targeting human ships carrying specific types of cargo. What types? Derek asked. Scientific equipment, research data, anything related to human technological development. Derek and Thector exchanged glances. If Morrison was right, then the attacks weren't just about territory or resources. They were about preventing humans from advancing technologically. Thec, Derek said quietly. Do you think the Galactic Council knows about this? I think the Galactic Council has been trying very hard not to know about this. Derek's expression darkened. Because investigating would mean admitting that someone is targeting humans for being humans. And that would require taking a position on humanity's place in the galaxy. Derek was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. If the Council was deliberately ignoring attacks on human settlements, it suggested that humanity's integration into galactic society was far more tenuous than anyone had admitted. Morrison, Derek said finally. Do you have any idea who might be behind the attacks? We've got some theories, but no proof. Let's hear them. Morrison looked uncomfortable. Captain, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound like paranoid conspiracy theories. Morrison, 3 days ago I was worried about whether I could work with an 8-foot-tall insect warrior without accidentally starting a war. My definition of paranoid conspiracy theories has gotten pretty flexible lately. Morrison glanced at Thector, then back at Derek. We think it's a coalition of several species working together. Which species? The ones who voted against human membership in the Galactic Council. Derek felt the cold knot in his stomach tighten. How many species voted against our membership? Thector answered. 47 species voted in favor of human membership. 32 voted against. 12 abstained. And you think the 32 who voted against are working together to, what, drive humans out of the galaxy? Morrison shook his head. Not all of them, but we think some of them are trying to prevent humans from establishing a permanent presence in Council space. By attacking settlements that are outside Council jurisdiction? By making sure humans don't have anywhere to go if the Council decides to revoke our membership. Derek stared at Morrison. That's actually pretty clever, and completely ruthless. Thector's claws tapped against his armor. Derek, if this theory is correct, then the attacks on human settlements are part of a larger political strategy. To keep humans marginalized in galactic politics. Yes. Derek walked over to the viewport, looking out at the stars. Thec, can I ask you something? Of course. Did the Kithara vote for or against human membership in the Council? Thector was quiet for a moment. We abstained. Derek turned back to face him. Why? Because we weren't sure humans could be trusted to follow galactic law. And now? Thector's compound eyes flickered. Now I think the more important question is whether galactic law can be trusted to protect humans. Derek nodded slowly. Morrison, how many human settlements have been attacked? 17 confirmed. Probably more that we don't know about. Casualties? Morrison's expression darkened. Over 3,000 dead. Twice that many missing. Derek felt something cold and angry settling in his chest. 3,000 dead humans, and the Galactic Council had decided it wasn't worth investigating because the settlements were destabilizing the region. Thec, Derek said quietly. I need to ask you something, and I need you to give me an honest answer. What? If we investigate this and find proof that Council member species are targeting humans, what happens next? Thector considered this carefully. Politically, it would cause a crisis that could tear the Council apart. And practically, it would mean that humans can't trust the Council to protect them. Derek nodded. And that would mean humans would have to protect themselves. Yes. Which is exactly what everyone's afraid of. Thector's claws stopped tapping. Derek, are you saying that humans would withdraw from the council? I'm saying that humans would do whatever they had to do to make sure this never happens again. The cargo bay was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Morrison spoke up. Captains, what are we going to do? Derek looked at Thector, who was staring back at him with an expression that might have been resignation or determination. We're going to investigate, Derek said finally, and we're going to find out who's behind the attacks. And then? Derek's smile was the kind of smile that had made 3 different alien species, 2 human admirals, and 1 particularly vindictive space station AI very nervous. Then we're going to explain to them why targeting humans was a very bad idea. Thector made that sound that might have been a sigh. Derek, you realize that if we do this, there's no going back. Thec, buddy, the moment someone decided to start killing humans for the crime of being human, there was already no going back. This could start a war. No, this could end one. The war started the moment someone attacked the first human settlement. We just didn't know we were fighting it. Thector was quiet for a long moment. Derek, if we do this, the Cathara will stand with humanity. Derek blinked. Just like that? Derek, my people may be afraid of humans, but we understand the importance of honor. And there is no honor in allowing the systematic murder of civilians to go unpunished. Morrison looked between the 2 of them. So we're really doing this? We're going after whoever's behind the attacks? Derek nodded. We're going after them, but we're going to do it right. No more piracy, no more attacks on civilian shipping. We investigate, we gather evidence, and we present it to the council. And if the council won't act on the evidence? Derek's expression hardened. Then we'll act on it ourselves. Thector's compound eyes flickered. Derek, that's essentially a declaration of independence from council authority. Thec, if the council won't protect human settlements, then humans will protect human settlements. That's not independence, that's survival. The other species won't see it that way. The other species are welcome to their opinions, but they're not welcome to kill humans without consequences. Derek activated his communicator. Tenacious, this is the captain. Signal the council fleet that we've secured the pirate vessels and are ready to begin prisoner transfer. Acknowledged, Captain. What about the investigation equipment? Belay that order. We're going to need the investigation equipment for a different kind of investigation. Sir? I'll explain when I get back. Derek out. He turned to Morrison. Captain Morrison, congratulations. You and your crew just became deputies in an investigation that's either going to prevent a war or start one. Morrison swallowed hard. Captain Vasquez, are you sure about this? Derek looked around the cargo bay, at Morrison's scared crew, at Thector's imposing figure, at the sensor logs that told the story of systematic attacks on human settlements. Morrison, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. 3 hours later, Derek was back aboard the Tenacious, standing in his ready room with Thector, and trying to figure out how to explain to his crew that they were about to embark on an investigation that could fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with the galaxy. Derek, Thector said, before we proceed, I need to ask you something. What's that? Are you prepared for the possibility that this investigation will prove that humans cannot coexist peacefully with the other species in the galaxy? Derek considered this. Thec, are you prepared for the possibility that this investigation will prove that humans shouldn't have to? Thector's claws tapped once against the table. Derek, that's not an answer. Sure it is. Thec, humans didn't ask to be the scary species in the galaxy. We didn't ask for everyone to be afraid of us. All we wanted was to be left alone to explore the universe and maybe make some friends along the way. But if someone is targeting humans for the crime of being human, then maybe it's time to give everyone a reason to be afraid. Thector was quiet for a long moment. Derek, you're talking about becoming the very thing that other species fear humans already are. No, Thec. I'm talking about becoming what we need to be to make sure this never happens again. Derek walked over to the viewport, looking out at the stars. You know what the real irony is in all of this? What? If whoever's behind these attacks had just left us alone, humans would have been content to be the weird, unpredictable species that everyone was a little nervous around but generally got along with. We'd have found our place in the galaxy, made our contributions, and probably would have spent most of our time arguing among ourselves about sports and politics. And now? Derek's reflection in the viewport showed a smile that was all teeth and no humor. Now they've reminded us why we're a Death World species. Thector's compound eyes flickered. Derek, I hope you know what you're doing. Thec, I never know what I'm doing. That's what makes me human. Derek turned back to face the Kitharin. But I know this. No one gets to hunt humans and think there won't be consequences. And if that makes us the monsters that everyone was afraid we were, then so be it. And the Kithara? The Kithara are welcome to stand with us or get out of the way. But either way, this ends. Thector stood, his full height making him an imposing figure even in the spacious ready room. Derek, you have my word. The Kithara will stand with humanity, even if it means war. Derek, some things are worth fighting for. Derek extended his hand. Partners? Thector grasped it with one of his claws. Partners. They shook hands, and Derek couldn't help but think that this was either the moment when two Death World species became allies, or the moment when the galaxy's worst fears about humanity came true. Probably both. Because that's what humans did. They took impossible situations and made them work, usually in ways that no one saw coming and everyone wished they had. The investigation that followed would uncover a conspiracy involving 12 species, reveal that the attacks on human settlements were part of a coordinated effort to prevent human expansion, and ultimately lead to the largest political crisis in Galactic Council history. But that's a story for another day. This story ends with two Death World species shaking hands in the ready room of a human warship, while somewhere in the Outer Rim territories, the people responsible for murdering 3,000 humans went about their business, completely unaware that they had just made the worst mistake in galactic history. They had reminded humans why everyone was afraid of them in the first place. And now they were going to find out what humanity looked like when it stopped trying to be friendly. The end. So let me get this straight. Admiral Zixith of the Galactic Confederation said, his four eyes blinking in what could only be described as cosmic bewilderment. You're telling me that the ancient prophecy, the one that's been passed down through 17 different civilizations over the course of 47,000 years, was talking about them? He gestured toward the viewing screen where a small blue-green planet hung in space like a particularly unremarkable Christmas ornament. Earth. The third rock from an average yellow star in what the locals called the Milky Way. Though frankly, the name alone should have been a red flag. I'm afraid so, sir, replied his aide, a nervous Thraxian whose tentacles were currently doing that twitchy thing they did when he was about to deliver particularly bad news. The translation matrix finally cracked the ancient Zorblaxian text. The terrible ones who shall bring chaos to order aren't some mythical demon race from the void between stars. They're just humans. The Admiral's primary mouth made a sound that roughly translated to, "Are you kidding me right now?" in 17 different languages. Now you might be wondering how we got to this point. How the most feared prophecy in galactic history, the one that had caused 3 separate civilizations to go extinct from sheer anxiety, turned out to be about a species that hadn't even figured out faster than light travel yet. Well, buckle up, because this is where things get interesting. See, the Galactic Confederation had been around for about 50,000 years, give or take a millennium. They were your typical galactic government, bureaucratic, efficient, and about as exciting as watching paint dry in a vacuum. They had rules for everything. I mean everything. There were regulations on how many tentacles you could have in public, no more than 8 unless you had a permit. Proper forms for declaring war, Form 27B, filed in triplicate. And even guidelines for how to properly surrender to a superior species, which, coincidentally, had never been used. The Confederation prided itself on order. Peace through paperwork, harmony through bureaucracy. It was a system that worked, mostly because every species in the galaxy had looked at the alternative. Chaos, disorder, the possibility of having to actually make decisions without committee approval, and collectively decided that endless meetings were preferable to uncertainty. But there was always that prophecy hanging over them like a particularly ominous cloud. The terrible ones who shall bring chaos to order shall emerge from the void between stars. Admiral Zixith recited from memory, his voice taking on the dramatic cadence reserved for ancient warnings and tax audits. They shall know not the beauty of proper documentation, nor the sacred art of committee formation. They shall look upon our perfect systems and laugh, bringing ruin to all that is orderly and good. He paused, looking at the small blue planet again. And you're telling me that refers to the species that invented something called reality television? According to our xenological analysis, yes, sir. The Admiral's aide, whose name was Bob, which was already suspicious. What kind of advanced alien species names their offspring Bob? pulled up a holographic display showing various intercepted Earth transmissions. Our long-range sensors have been monitoring their electromagnetic emissions for the past century. The data is concerning. And it was. The Confederation's first glimpse of humanity had come through their television broadcasts, which had been leaking into space for decades. The Xenological Department had spent months analyzing shows like The Jerry Springer Show, Jackass, and something called Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and had concluded that humanity was either the most terrifying species in the galaxy or the most insane. Possibly both. "Look at this," Bob said, manipulating the display to show a compilation of human behavior. "They regularly launch themselves out of perfectly good aircraft for fun. They've invented a sport where they chase a ball around a field for 90 minutes and then celebrate by flipping cars. And don't get me started on something called Black Friday shopping." The Admiral watched in growing horror as the display showed humans engaging in what could only be described as ritualistic combat over consumer goods. Are those their mating rituals?" "We don't think so, sir. Our xenobiologists believe they do this for entertainment." "Entertainment," the Admiral repeated slowly, as if the word itself might explode. "They engage in potentially lethal combat for entertainment." "It gets worse, sir." Of course it did. In the Admiral's experience, it always got worse when Bob said it got worse. They've been monitoring their global communications network, something they call the Internet. Sir, they've turned the ability to argue with strangers into an art form. They have entire platforms dedicated to disagreeing with people they've never met about topics they know nothing about. The Admiral's third eye began to twitch. "Please tell me you're exaggerating." "I wish I were, sir. But it gets worse." There it was again. The Admiral was beginning to understand why his predecessor had retired early to a nice quiet planet, where the most exciting thing that happened was the occasional volcanic eruption. "They've created something called pineapple pizza, sir. It's caused more arguments than most species have had wars." "Pineapple pizza? A food item, sir. They take a perfectly good bread disc, cover it with tomato sauce and cheese, and then, and I cannot stress this enough, they put fruit on it. Tropical fruit. On bread. And then they argue about whether it's acceptable." The Admiral stared at the display for a long moment. "Bob, I need you to run a full diagnostic on our translation matrix, because what you're describing sounds less like a civilization and more like a psychological experiment gone wrong." "Already did, sir. 3 times. The results are consistent." "And you're certain these are the terrible ones from the prophecy?" "The linguistic analysis is conclusive, sir. The ancient Zorblaxian phrase, 'terrible ones who shall bring chaos to order,' literally translates to, 'those who question everything and fill out no forms.'" The Admiral felt a chill run down his spine. In a galaxy where the proper procedure for sneezing required Form 18C filed within 48 hours, a species that questioned everything and filled out no forms was indeed terrifying. But here's the thing about humans that the Galactic Confederation hadn't quite grasped yet. They weren't just chaotic for the sake of chaos. They were creatively chaotic. There's a difference, and it's an important one. You see, while the Confederation had spent 50,000 years perfecting the art of bureaucratic efficiency, humans had spent their much shorter existence perfecting the art of making things up as they went along. And somehow, improbably, it worked. "Sir," Bob said, interrupting the Admiral's existential crisis, "there's something else. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected unusual activity in the human star system. It appears they're building something." "Building what?" "We're not entirely sure, sir. But based on the energy signatures, it appears to be some kind of space vessel." The Admiral's remaining composure cracked. "They're building a ship? But they haven't even mastered faster-than-light travel." "No, sir, they haven't. But according to our projections, they're going to try anyway." And this, right here, was the moment when the full horror of the situation became clear to the Galactic Confederation. Humans weren't just chaotic. They were the kind of chaotic that looked at the impossible and said, "Hold my beer." The ship they were building was called the Defiance, and it was exactly the kind of vessel you'd expect a species that had never been told the proper way to build a spaceship to construct. It was part spacecraft, part flying laboratory, and part middle finger to the laws of physics. The lead engineer was a guy named Marcus Holloway, who had a PhD in theoretical physics, a master's in applied engineering, and a complete disregard for the concept of safety regulations. He was the kind of person who looked at a blueprint and immediately started figuring out how to improve it with spare parts and creative problem solving. "The hyperdrive is ready for testing," he announced to the crew during their final briefing. "I should probably mention that it's based on a theory I came up with during a particularly long bathroom break. But hey, that's how penicillin was discovered, right?" The crew, being human, took this in stride. They'd all volunteered for what was essentially a suicide mission to test humanity's first faster-than-light drive. And they'd done it with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for free pizza or Black Friday sales. "So what's the worst that could happen?" asked Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's physicist, with the kind of smile that suggested she already knew the answer and was looking forward to it. "Well," Marcus said, consulting his notes, "we could tear a hole in space-time, accidentally create a black hole, or get turned inside out on a molecular level. But on the bright side, if it works, we'll be the first humans to achieve faster-than-light travel using nothing but pure stubbornness and a hyperdrive I built in my garage." "Sounds about right," said Captain James Mitchell, who had been chosen to lead the mission primarily because he was the only person crazy enough to volunteer and stable enough to not accidentally blow up the ship before they reached space. "Let's go make some history." Meanwhile, back on the Confederation flagship, Admiral Zixith was having what could only be described as a panic attack. "They're going to do it, aren't they?" he asked Bob, who was monitoring the human transmissions with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters or reality TV shows. "It certainly appears that way, sir. They're scheduled to launch in approximately 6 hours. And their hyperdrive?" "Completely untested, sir. Based on our analysis, it appears to be held together with metal alloys, electromagnetic fields, and what they call hope." The Admiral made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a death rattle. "Bob, send a message to the High Council. Tell them the prophecy is coming true, and we're about to have a very big problem." "What kind of problem, sir?" "The kind where a species that argues about fruit on bread is about to join the galactic community." Now, you might think that the first faster-than-light journey by humans would be a momentous occasion, a careful, methodical test of new technology, conducted with all the precision and caution that such a historic moment deserved. You would be wrong. The Defiance launched exactly on schedule, which was impressive considering that 3 major systems had failed during the countdown and had been fixed with what the engineers called percussive maintenance, which was just fancy talk for hitting things with wrenches until they worked. "Hyperdrive is online," Marcus announced from the engine room, his voice crackling through the ship's communication system. "All systems are green, or at least they're not red, which is close enough." "Understood," Captain Mitchell replied from the bridge. "Initiating jump sequence in 10, 9, 8. This was the moment when 50,000 years of galactic civilization held its collective breath.
3, 2, 1, jump!
The Defiance disappeared from normal space in a flash of light that was roughly equivalent to setting off a small star in the middle of Earth's solar system. For a moment, the universe held its breath. Then, in a completely different part of the galaxy, roughly 17 light-years away, the Defiance reappeared in a shower of sparks, backwards, upside down, and with its hull glowing like a Christmas tree. "Well," Captain Mitchell said, looking at the readings on his console, "that was either completely successful or completely catastrophic. Hard to tell which." "Hull integrity is holding," reported the ship's engineer, a cheerful woman named Lisa Zhang who had volunteered for the mission because she thought it sounded fun. "We're getting some interesting readings from the quantum flux capacitors, but nothing's actually exploding, so I'm calling it a win." "Are we where we're supposed to be?" asked Dr. Vasquez, checking her instruments. "Define supposed to be," Marcus said from the engine room. "We're definitely somewhere else," which was the general idea. And they were. The Defiance had successfully made humanity's first faster-than-light jump, traveling 17 light-years in approximately 3 seconds. The fact that they'd ended up in a completely different location than intended was, according to the crew, a minor navigational issue. What they didn't know was that they'd jumped directly into the middle of a Confederation patrol route, approximately 3 billion kilometers from the flagship harmonious bureaucracy. "Sir," Bob said, his tentacles practically vibrating with panic, "they've done it. They've actually done it." Admiral Zixth looked at the sensor readings, which showed a small human vessel that was currently broadcasting what appeared to be music at high volume. "What's that sound?" "According to our translation matrix, it's called rock and roll, sir. Specifically, something called Born to be Wild." The Admiral's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "They're playing music?" "Loud music, sir. Our sensors indicate it's audible from approximately 50,000 kilometers away. They've just achieved faster-than-light travel for the first time in their species' history. And they're celebrating with loud music?" "It appears so, sir." The Admiral stared at the display showing the human ship, which was now performing what could only be described as victory rolls through space. "Bob, get me a direct communication channel to that vessel." Sir, first contact protocols require... Bob, I don't think the protocols were written with humans in mind. Open the channel. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the Defiance. Captain Mitchell was visible in the center of the screen, grinning like someone who had just pulled off the greatest practical joke in galactic history. Well, hello there, Captain Mitchell said, apparently completely unfazed by the fact that he was talking to a four-eyed alien. You must be the locals. Nice to meet you. Admiral Zixith felt his composure slip another notch. In 50,000 years of galactic civilization, first contact had always followed a very specific protocol. There were procedures, forms to fill out, committees to consult. It was a carefully orchestrated dance of diplomatic precision. I am Admiral Zixith of the Galactic Confederation, he said, falling back on the standard greeting. You are in violation of approximately 47 different space traffic regulations, and your vessel is not properly registered with the... Whoa, hold up there, Admiral, Captain Mitchell interrupted, which was approximately the most diplomatically incorrect thing he could have done. We just made our first faster-than-light jump about 5 minutes ago. We're still figuring out where we are, let alone what forms we need to fill out. The Admiral's third eye began to twitch again. You don't have the proper documentation for interstellar travel? Buddy, we don't even have proper documentation for this ship. We built it in a garage using spare parts and determination. Spare parts and determination, the Admiral repeated slowly. Well, and coffee, lots and lots of coffee. This was the moment when the full weight of the prophecy hit Admiral Zixith like a freight train loaded with bureaucratic nightmares. Here was a species that had just achieved faster-than-light travel using spare parts, determination, and caffeine, and their first act upon meeting galactic civilization was to ignore every single protocol that had been carefully developed over 50 millennia. Captain Mitchell, the Admiral said, trying to regain some semblance of diplomatic composure. Perhaps you would be willing to accompany us to the nearest Confederation station for proper processing? Captain Mitchell looked around at his crew, who all shrugged in the universal human gesture for, why not? Sure, he said, but we're not filling out any forms until we get some answers about this whole galactic community thing, and maybe some of that coffee I've been hearing about. Coffee? Yeah, we intercepted some of your transmissions. Apparently, you guys have been trading coffee for the past 3,000 years, and from what we can tell, it's pretty much the best stuff in the galaxy. The Admiral's aide leaned over and whispered something in his ear that made his 4 eyes go wide. Captain Mitchell, the Admiral said slowly, are you telling me that your species achieved faster-than-light travel in order to get better coffee? Well, no, Captain Mitchell replied. We achieved faster-than-light travel because we thought it would be cool. The coffee thing is just a bonus. And that, right there, was the moment when the Galactic Confederation realized that everything they thought they knew about the universe was about to change. Because here's the thing about humans that the prophecy hadn't quite captured. They didn't just bring chaos to order. They brought the kind of chaos that somehow made everything work better. The Confederation had spent 50,000 years creating the perfect bureaucratic system. Every possible scenario had been anticipated. Every potential problem had been addressed with the appropriate paperwork. It was a system that worked flawlessly, as long as everyone followed the rules. But humans didn't follow rules. They looked at rules and saw suggestions. They looked at impossible problems and saw interesting challenges. They looked at the carefully ordered universe and said, you know what this needs? More cowbell. The next few hours were a masterclass in human adaptability. The Defiance was escorted to Confederation Station Alpha 7, a massive space station that served as the regional headquarters for the local sector. It was a marvel of engineering. A testament to 50,000 years of careful planning and precise construction. The humans took one look at it and immediately started making suggestions for improvements. You know, Dr. Vasquez said as they docked, if you moved the docking bays to the outer ring and added some rotating sections, you could generate artificial gravity without all those expensive gravity generators. The station commander, a dignified Altarian named Coordinator Veltar, felt something twitch in what might have been irritation or fascination. The gravity generators are perfectly functional. They have been operating without incident for 7,000 years. Oh, they're great, Marcus said, studying the station's schematics on his tablet. But you could probably power a small planet with the energy you're using. With a few modifications, you could cut your power consumption by 60% and increase your internal volume by 30%. We have not had any complaints about our internal volume, Coordinator Veltar replied stiffly. That's because you haven't tried our approach, Lisa Zhang said cheerfully. We specialize in making more with less. It's kind of our thing. This was another thing about humans that the Confederation was beginning to discover. They were incapable of looking at a perfectly functional system without trying to improve it. It was like some kind of species-wide compulsion. The official first contact ceremony was scheduled for 1400 hours Confederation Standard Time. It was to be a formal affair, with representatives from 12 different species, proper documentation, and a carefully scripted exchange of greetings that had been perfected over the course of 3,000 years. The humans showed up 20 minutes early, wearing their standard uniforms, which looked like they'd been designed by someone who had never heard of formal wear, and immediately started mingling with the assembled dignitaries. "So you're from the Rigel system?" Captain Mitchell asked Ambassador Tirnash, a distinguished Rigelian who had been involved in first contact protocols for the past 2 centuries. "We've been watching your star from Earth for years. Beautiful binary system. How do you deal with the tidal forces?" Ambassador Tirnash, who had been prepared for formal introductions and ceremonial gift exchanges, found himself engaged in a technical discussion about stellar mechanics. We use gravitational compensators," he said, somewhat bewildered. "Gravitational compensators," Captain Mitchell repeated, nodding thoughtfully. "Yeah, we thought about that, but we figured it would be easier to just build our habitats in the Lagrange points. Less energy expenditure, more stable orbits." "You have habitats in the Lagrange points?" Ambassador Tirnash asked, his professional composure beginning to crack. "Not yet," Captain Mitchell replied, "but we're working on it. Should have the first one operational in about 5 years. This was how the humans managed to completely derail the formal first contact ceremony without even trying. Instead of carefully scripted diplomatic exchanges, the assembled dignitaries found themselves engaged in wide-ranging discussions about everything from stellar engineering to the proper way to make coffee. "The key is the water temperature," Dr. Vasquez was explaining to a group of fascinated xenobiologists. "Too hot and you scald the beans, too cold and you don't extract enough flavor. Humans have been perfecting the process for centuries." "Fascinating," said Dr. Quintel, a Thraxian scientist who had been studying human transmissions for the past year. "And this coffee is a stimulant?" "Oh, it's more than that," Marcus interjected. "It's a lifestyle, a philosophy, a way of approaching the universe with the energy and enthusiasm necessary to make impossible things happen." Coordinator Veltar watched the proceedings with a growing sense of unease. This wasn't how first contact was supposed to go. There were protocols to follow, procedures to observe. The humans were supposed to be overwhelmed by the majesty of galactic civilization, not casually discussing improvements to systems that had worked perfectly for millennia. "Admiral," he said, approaching Admiral Zixth, who was watching the humans with the expression of someone who had just realized his worst fears were coming true. "Perhaps we should proceed with the formal ceremonies." "Coordinator," the Admiral replied. "I don't think formal ceremonies are going to work with these people." "But the protocols assume that the new species will be impressed by our accomplishments and eager to learn our ways," the Admiral said. "These people just casually mentioned that they've been watching our stars for years, and have already figured out more efficient ways to do things we've been doing since before their species discovered fire." The Admiral wasn't wrong. The humans had been on the station for less than 3 hours, and they'd already identified 17 different ways to improve efficiency, suggested modifications to the artificial gravity system, and somehow convinced the station's head chef to try something called pizza, which had resulted in a line of curious aliens that stretched around 3 decks. "The thing is," Captain Mitchell was saying to a group of assembled dignitaries, "we've been preparing for this moment for decades. Not this specific moment, obviously, but the idea of meeting other intelligent species. We've got protocols, procedures, even a whole department dedicated to xenological relations." "You have protocols for first contact?" Admiral Zixith asked, intrigued despite himself. "Oh, sure," Captain Mitchell replied. "Standard procedure is to be polite, respectful, and curious. Learn as much as possible, share what we can, and try not to accidentally start any wars." That's remarkably sensible," Coordinator Veltar said, sounding surprised. "We're not complete barbarians," Dr. Vasquez said with a laugh. "We've just learned that the best way to handle new situations is to stay flexible and adapt as we go." "Adapt as you go," the Admiral repeated. "Without proper planning? Without committees? Without filing the appropriate forms?" "Forms are great," Marcus said, "but sometimes you need to act first and fill out the paperwork later, especially when you're dealing with something that's never been done before." This was the fundamental philosophical difference between humans and the Galactic Confederation, and it was about to turn the entire galaxy upside down. The Confederation had achieved stability through careful planning and meticulous documentation. Every decision was made by committee. Every action was preceded by appropriate forms, and every possible outcome was anticipated and prepared for. It was a system that had brought peace and prosperity to thousands of worlds. But it was also a system that had become so focused on maintaining order that it had forgotten how to innovate. The Confederation hadn't seen a truly new idea in over 10,000 years. They had perfected everything, cataloged everything, and created procedures for everything. Then along came humans, who looked at perfection and said, "That's nice, but what if we tried it this way instead?" "Captain Mitchell," Admiral Zixith said, "I need to ask you something. Your species has been monitoring our communications for decades. You've seen our technology, our achievements, our vast galactic civilization. Doesn't any of this intimidate you?" Captain Mitchell looked around at the assembled aliens, at the massive space station, at the technological marvels that surrounded them. Then he shrugged. "Sure, it's impressive," he said. "But intimidating? Not really. I mean, you guys have been at this for 50,000 years. You've had time to figure things out. We've only been seriously thinking about space travel for about a century, and we've only had the technology for a few decades. Give us another 1,000 years and we'll probably have you beat." The casual confidence in that statement was staggering. Here was a species that had just achieved faster-than-light travel, meeting a galactic civilization that had been perfecting interstellar technology for 50 millennia, and they were already talking about surpassing it. "You think you can surpass us?" Coordinator Veltar asked, his tone somewhere between incredulous and insulted. "Not think," Marcus said. "No. See, the thing about humans is that we're really, really good at taking existing ideas and making them better. We look at something that works and ask, how can we make this work better? And then we do it." "But our systems are already optimized," Dr. Quintel protested. "We've spent thousands of years perfecting—" "Yeah, but optimized for what?" Dr. Vasquez interrupted. "Efficiency, safety, comfort?" "There's always room for improvement, always a different way to approach a problem. That's what makes it fun." "Fun?" Admiral Zixith repeated. "You find technological development fun?" "Are you kidding?" Lisa Zhang said. "It's the best kind of fun. You get to take something that's never been done before, figure out how to make it work, and then watch it succeed beyond your wildest expectations. What could be more fun than that?" This was the moment when the Galactic Confederation began to understand that they weren't just dealing with a new species. They were dealing with a species that approached the universe with a fundamentally different philosophy. The Confederation had spent 50,000 years creating order out of chaos. They had built a civilization based on careful planning, meticulous documentation, and the gradual accumulation of knowledge. It was a system that worked, but it was also a system that had become static. Humans, on the other hand, thrived on chaos. They saw disorder not as something to be eliminated, but as something to be harnessed. They didn't fear the unknown, they embraced it. They didn't try to control change, they rode it like a wave. "I think," Admiral Zixith said slowly, "that we need to contact the High Council immediately." "Is that a problem?" Captain Mitchell asked. "Captain, I honestly don't know. In 50,000 years of galactic civilization, we've never encountered a species quite like yours. We're going to need to adjust our expectations." "Adjust your expectations how?" The Admiral looked at him for a long moment. "We're going to need to get used to the idea that the galaxy is about to become a much more interesting place." And he was right. Over the next few weeks, as news of humanity's arrival spread throughout the Confederation, the reaction was complex. Some species were fascinated by the humans' approach to problem-solving. The Altarians, who had been struggling with a particularly complex engineering challenge for the past century, invited human consultants to examine the problem. The humans solved it in 3 days, using a combination of creative thinking and what they called outside-the-box reasoning. Other species were terrified. The Betans, who had built their entire civilization on the principle of careful, methodical planning, saw the humans as a threat to everything they held dear. The idea of a species that made things up as they went along was, to them, the stuff of nightmares. But perhaps the most interesting reaction came from the younger members of various species. The ones who had grown up in the perfectly ordered Confederation and had begun to chafe against its limitations. They saw the humans not as a threat, but as a breath of fresh air. "You really built that hyperdrive in your garage?" asked Kextal, a young Rigelian engineer who had come to study human technology. "Well, technically it was Marcus's garage," Captain Mitchell replied. "But yeah, we built it from scratch using mostly salvaged parts and a lot of trial and error." "That's incredible," Kextal said. "In our system, you need approval from 17 different committees before you can even begin designing a new hyperdrive. The paperwork alone takes years." "Years?" Marcus looked shocked. "That's insane. By the time you get approval, the technology you're trying to develop has probably been superseded by something better." "Exactly," Kextal said. That's what I've been trying to tell them for years, but they always say, this is how we've always done it, and it works. Just because something works doesn't mean it can't work better, Dr. Vasquez said. The key is to stay curious, keep experimenting, and never be afraid to try something new. This kind of conversation was happening all over the galaxy. Human ideas were spreading like wildfire, not through official channels or diplomatic negotiations, but through simple person-to-person contact. Young aliens were starting to question long-held assumptions, to wonder if there might be better ways to do things. The High Council of the Galactic Confederation was not pleased. They've been in the galaxy for less than a month, High Coordinator Zalthek announced to the assembled council. And they're already disrupting our established order. Species that have been content with their systems for millennia are suddenly demanding changes, improvements, innovations. And this is bad because, asked Councillor Yichtel, one of the younger members of the council. Because our systems work, Zalthek replied. They've brought peace and prosperity to the galaxy for 50,000 years. Why risk that for the sake of unnecessary change? Because, said Councillor Merdan, maybe the humans are right. Maybe our systems could work better. The council chamber fell silent. In 50,000 years of Confederation history, no one had ever suggested that their systems might be improved upon. Councillor Merdan, Zalthek said carefully, are you suggesting that we abandon 50 millennia of careful development in favor of the chaotic approach favored by a species that has been in space for less than a century? I'm suggesting, Merdan replied, that we might learn something from them. This was heresy of the highest order. The Confederation had always been the teacher, never the student. They were the advanced civilization, the galactic elder statesmen who welcomed new species into their carefully ordered community. The idea that they might actually learn something from a newly contacted species was unprecedented, but the evidence was hard to ignore. In the few weeks since the humans had arrived, they had solved engineering problems that had stumped Confederation scientists for decades, improved the efficiency of systems that had been considered optimal, and generally made everyone around them more creative and innovative just by being themselves. High Coordinator, said Admiral Zixth, who had been following the human situation more closely than anyone, I think we need to accept that the humans represent something new. Not just another species to be integrated into our existing systems, but a fundamental challenge to how we approach the universe. And you see this as a good thing? Zalthek asked. I see it as inevitable, the Admiral replied. The humans are here, and they're not going to change to fit our systems. The question is, are we going to adapt to them, or are we going to be left behind? It was a question that went to the heart of everything the Confederation stood for. For 50,000 years, they had been the dominant force in the galaxy, the civilized center around which all other species orbited. The idea that they might need to change, to adapt, to learn from a species they considered primitive was almost unthinkable. But then again, so was the idea of a species achieving faster-than-light travel using spare parts and determination. All right, Zalthek said finally. What do you propose? I propose, Admiral Zixith said, that we invite the humans to establish a permanent presence in the Confederation, not as junior members to be educated and civilized, but as equal partners with something to contribute. The suggestion caused an uproar that could probably be heard in the next star system. The idea of treating a newly contacted species as equals was revolutionary. The idea of treating a species that had been in space for less than a century as equals was barely short of insane. But as the debate raged on, one thing became clear. The humans had already changed the galaxy, whether the Confederation was ready for it or not. The question was no longer whether to accept them, but how to manage the changes they were bringing. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the news of first contact had caused its own kind of chaos. The revelation that humanity was not alone in the universe, and that they had not only made contact but had apparently impressed the galactic community, had sent shockwaves through every government, every religion, and every individual on the planet. So let me get this straight, said President Elizabeth Warren during an emergency session of the United Nations. Our people built a faster-than-light drive in a garage, jumped 17 light-years on their first try, and immediately started giving technological advice to aliens who have been in space for 50,000 years. That's essentially correct, Madam President, replied Dr. Jennifer Hayes, the head of the newly formed Department of Extraterrestrial Relations. The reports from Captain Mitchell's team are quite detailed. They've been invited to establish a permanent human presence in something called the Galactic Confederation. And these aliens, they're not planning to invade us or anything? No, ma'am. If anything, they seem to be more worried about us invading them. Apparently we've been causing quite a stir in their normally very orderly society. President Warren laughed, which was probably not the reaction most people expected from someone who had just learned that humanity had made first contact with an alien civilization. Of course we have, she said. Send a message to Captain Mitchell. Tell him that Earth fully supports whatever he's doing out there, and that we're prepared to back him up with whatever resources he needs. Ma'am, shouldn't we consult with the other world leaders first? Establish some kind of unified Earth policy for dealing with... Dr. Hayes, the president interrupted. We've got a crew of humans who just impressed a 50,000-year-old galactic civilization by being themselves. I think we can trust them to represent humanity without micromanaging them from 40 trillion kilometers away. This was perhaps the most human response possible to the situation. Complete confidence in their people's ability to figure things out as they went along, combined with a willingness to support them, even when nobody was entirely sure what they were doing. Back in space, Captain Mitchell was dealing with his own set of challenges. The Defiance had been assigned quarters on Confederation Station Alpha 7, while the High Council debated humanity's future role in galactic civilization. In the meantime, the crew found themselves the center of attention for every curious alien within 100 light-years. Captain, Lisa Zhang said, looking up from her engineering console. We've got another delegation here to see us. This time it's from something called the Procyon Collective. They want to know if we can help them with their energy distribution problems. Energy distribution problems? Captain Mitchell asked. Apparently, they've got a perfectly functional power grid that covers their entire star system. But it's been operating at the same efficiency level for the past 3,000 years. They want to know if we have any suggestions for improvement. Captain Mitchell sighed. In the past week, they'd been consulted on everything from warp drive modifications to urban planning. It seemed like every species in the galaxy had problems they'd been living with for centuries, and they all thought the humans might have fresh perspectives on solutions. The funny thing was, they usually did. All right, he said. Set up a meeting for this afternoon, but make sure they understand that we're not miracle workers. We're just people who like solving problems. Captain, Dr. Vasquez said from her station. I think that's exactly why they keep coming to us. In a galaxy where everyone's been doing things the same way for thousands of years, people who like solving problems are pretty rare. She had a point. The Confederation had achieved such a high level of efficiency and order that most species had stopped looking for better ways to do things. They had systems that worked, and working systems were good enough. The idea of continuous improvement, of constantly seeking better solutions, was foreign to them. But it was second nature to humans. You know what I think? Marcus said, emerging from the engine room with his usual collection of grease stains and satisfied expressions. I think we've stumbled into something bigger than just first contact. How do you mean? Captain Mitchell asked. I mean, look around. We've been here for a week, and already we've got aliens from dozens of different species coming to us for advice. Not because we're more advanced than they are. Hell, most of them have technology that makes our stuff look like stone knives and bearskins. But because we approach problems differently. And I think they need that. I think the whole galaxy needs that. They've been so focused on maintaining their perfect systems that they've forgotten how to innovate, how to improve, how to dream big. Marcus was right, though it would take the Galactic Confederation several more months to fully understand the implications of what he was saying. The breakthrough came during what became known as the vegan crisis. The Vega system had been dealing with a problem for the better part of 2 centuries. Their primary star had developed an instability that was causing periodic solar flares, which disrupted their planetary communication networks and made space travel dangerous. The Confederation's best scientists had studied the problem extensively and concluded that there was no practical solution. The vegans would simply have to relocate their entire civilization to another star system. This was the kind of problem that the Confederation handled well. They had procedures for planetary evacuation, forms for interstellar relocation, and committees dedicated to managing the logistics of moving entire civilizations. It would take about 50 years and cost approximately 40 trillion credits, but it could be done. Then the humans heard about it. Wait, let me get this straight, Dr. Vasquez said to the vegan delegation that had come to say goodbye before beginning their evacuation. Your star is unstable because of magnetic field fluctuations in the corona? That is correct, replied Ambassador Felnox, a dignified vegan who had been managing the evacuation preparations for the past decade. Our scientists have determined that the instability will continue to worsen over the next 1,000 years, making our system uninhabitable. Have you tried stabilizing the magnetic field? Ambassador Felnox's expression was the alien equivalent of someone being asked if they'd tried turning it off and on again. Dr. Vasquez, we are talking about the magnetic field of a star. The energy involved is beyond calculation. Sure, but energy isn't the problem, Marcus said, studying the stellar data on his tablet. It's about applying the energy in the right way, at the right time, in the right place. You cannot stabilize a star's magnetic field, Ambassador Felinox said firmly. It is impossible. Is it? Dr. Vasquez asked. Or is it just really, really hard? This was the difference between human and Confederation thinking in a nutshell. The Confederation looked at impossible problems and concluded they were impossible. Humans looked at impossible problems and concluded they were really, really hard. Look, Captain Mitchell said, we're not saying it's easy. We're saying it might be possible. And if it's possible, it's worth trying. The risk, Ambassador Felinox began. The risk of trying is that it doesn't work, and you end up in exactly the same situation you're in now, Lisa Zhang interrupted. The risk of not trying is that you definitely lose your home system. Besides, Marcus added, we've got some ideas about how to approach the problem. It would involve building a network of magnetic field generators in solar orbit, synchronized to counteract the fluctuations in the star's natural field. That would require technology we do not possess, Ambassador Felinox said. But we could develop it, Dr. Vasquez replied. Working together. Humans are good at the crazy theoretical stuff, and you guys are good at the precise engineering. Between us, we might be able to pull it off. Ambassador Felinox looked at the humans for a long moment. You are suggesting that we attempt to stabilize our star rather than evacuate our system. We're suggesting you have options, Captain Mitchell said. The evacuation plan is solid. If that's what you want to do, the Confederation will help you do it right. But if you want to try saving your system, we're willing to help with that too. It was an offer that went against every principle of Confederation planning. The evacuation was certain, tested, and safe. The stabilization project was theoretical, untested, and risky. By any rational measure, the evacuation was the better choice. But Ambassador Felinox didn't make a rational decision. He made a human decision. How long would you need to determine if stabilization is possible? He asked. Give us 6 months, Dr. Vasquez said. If we can't prove the concept works in 6 months, we'll help you with the evacuation. The Vegan Stabilization Project became the first major collaboration between humans and the Galactic Confederation, and it changed everything. The project team included humans, vegans, Altarians, Regelians, and representatives from a dozen other species. It was the largest scientific collaboration in Confederation history, and it was based on a fundamentally human premise, that impossible problems were just really hard problems that nobody had solved yet. The work was difficult, dangerous, and completely unprecedented. They were attempting something that had never been tried before, using technology that didn't exist yet, to solve a problem that everyone else had deemed unsolvable. In other words, it was exactly the kind of project that humans excelled at. The magnetic field generators are online, Marcus reported from the primary construction platform, which was orbiting approximately 10 million kilometers from Vega's surface. All systems are green. Synchronization matrix is stable, added Dr. Quintel, the Thraxian scientist who had become the project's leading expert on stellar magnetic dynamics. Field strength is within acceptable parameters. Initiating test sequence, Dr. Vasquez announced from the command center on Vega Prime. All stations prepare for field activation in 10, 9, 8. This was the moment when the entire galaxy held its breath. Not because they expected the project to fail. Everyone expected the project to fail. But because they were beginning to understand that when humans said something was possible, they had a disturbing tendency to be right. 3, 2, 1. Activation. The magnetic field generators came online in perfect synchronization, creating a web of controlled magnetic force that stretched across millions of kilometers of space. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the star's corona stabilized. The solar flares that had plagued the Vega system for 2 centuries simply stopped. The chaotic magnetic fluctuations that had made the star unstable smoothed out into regular, predictable patterns. The deadly radiation that had been slowly sterilizing the system's planets dropped to normal levels. Well, Captain Mitchell said, watching the readouts from the command center. That actually worked. It was perhaps the most understated reaction in galactic history. The humans had just accomplished something that the galaxy's best scientists had declared impossible, and their response was essentially, neat. But the implications were staggering. If humans could stabilize an unstable star, what else could they do? What other impossible problems might actually be solvable? The answer, as it turned out, was pretty much all of them. Over the next year, human-led teams tackled problems that had been plaguing the galaxy for millennia. They developed new terraforming techniques that could transform dead worlds into garden planets in decades rather than centuries. They created transportation systems that made interstellar travel as easy as taking a bus. They even figured out how to make bureaucracy more efficient, which many species considered their greatest miracle yet. But perhaps more importantly, they changed how the galaxy thought about problems. The humans have taught us something important, High Coordinator Zelthek announced to the Galactic Council during their annual review. They have shown us that the difference between impossible and extremely difficult is often just a matter of perspective. And creativity, added Councillor Merdan, who had become one of humanity's strongest advocates. They approach every problem as if it's a puzzle to be solved rather than an obstacle to be avoided. Which brings us to the question of humanity's permanent status in the Confederation, Zelthek continued. The committee has reached a unanimous decision. Admiral Zixith, who was attending the session as humanity's informal representative, held his breath. Despite everything the humans had accomplished, there was still resistance to fully integrating them into Confederation society. Some species remained convinced that human chaos would ultimately destroy the galaxy's carefully maintained order. The Galactic Council, Zelthek announced, hereby grants humanity full membership in the Confederation, with all the rights and responsibilities therein. Furthermore, we are establishing a new department, the Bureau of Innovative Solutions, to be jointly administered by human and Confederation personnel. The chamber erupted in what could only be described as polite applause, which was the Confederation equivalent of a standing ovation. There is one condition, Zelthek added, and the chamber fell silent. Humanity must agree to establish a formal academy for training other species in human problem-solving techniques. We believe that the galaxy would benefit from a more widespread understanding of your unique approaches. Admiral Zixth smiled, which was a somewhat disturbing sight given his facial structure. I believe humanity would be honored to share their knowledge. Though I should warn you, their teaching methods can be somewhat unconventional.
How unconventional? Councillor Yichtel asked.
Well, the Admiral replied, their preliminary curriculum includes courses titled Creative Problem Solving and Its Applications to Engineering, The Art of Making It Up as You Go Along, and Advanced Stubbornness, Refusing to Accept the Impossible. The council chamber fell silent as the assembled dignitaries tried to process this information.
These are actual academic courses? Zelthek asked.
According to the humans, yes. They claim that these skills are fundamental to their approach to problem solving, and they want to teach these skills to other species. They insist on it. They say that technical knowledge without the proper mindset is like having a starship without a pilot. There was a long pause as the council considered the implications of this. Very well, Zelthek said finally. Approve the academy, but perhaps we should start with a small pilot program. Already planned, Admiral Zixith replied. The first class will have 50 students from 25 different species. Captain Mitchell will be the primary instructor. And what will be the first lesson? Admiral Zixith consulted his notes. According to the curriculum, the first lesson is titled, Look at this problem and tell me it can't be solved. I dare you. The council sat in stunned silence. In 50,000 years of galactic civilization, they had never encountered anything quite like human educational philosophy. Admiral, Zelthek said carefully, are you certain this is going to work? Honestly, Admiral Zixith replied, I have no idea. But if there's one thing I've learned about humans, it's that when they're certain something will work, it usually does. And when they're not certain, it works anyway. And that, perhaps, was the most accurate summary of humanity's impact on the galaxy that anyone could have given. 6 months later, the Galactic Confederation Academy of Innovative Solutions graduated its first class. The 50 students returned to their homeworlds with new ways of thinking about problems, new approaches to challenges, and a fundamentally different understanding of what was possible. The ripple effects were immediate and dramatic. Planets that had struggled with resource shortages for centuries suddenly discovered new ways to increase efficiency. Species that had been locked in territorial disputes for millennia found creative solutions that benefited everyone. Even the Betans, who had initially been terrified of human chaos, grudgingly admitted that their carefully planned society had become more vibrant and dynamic since adopting human problem-solving techniques. You know, Captain Mitchell said to Dr. Vasquez as they watched the latest class of Academy graduates prepare to return to their homeworlds. When we built that hyperdrive in Marcus's garage, I don't think any of us expected it would lead to this. What? Revolutionizing an entire galactic civilization? Dr. Vasquez replied. Yeah, that wasn't really on my list of expected outcomes either. Do you think we did the right thing? He asked. I mean, we've completely disrupted their entire way of life. 50,000 years of carefully maintained order, gone in less than 2 years. Doctor. Vasquez looked out at the Academy campus, where dozens of different species were working together on projects that would have been considered impossible just a few years ago. Students and instructors from across the galaxy were collaborating on everything from new forms of faster-than-light travel to theoretical solutions for universe-level engineering problems. Jim, she said, using his first name for the first time in years. Look around. Do you see anyone who looks unhappy? He looked. The campus was buzzing with activity, but it was the kind of excited, energetic activity that came from people who were passionate about what they were doing. Students were engaged, instructors were enthusiastic, and everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives.
No, he admitted. They all look pretty happy. That's because they are happy.
For the first time in thousands of years, they're being challenged. They're solving new problems, creating new solutions, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. We didn't destroy their civilization, we helped it evolve. She was right, of course. The Galactic Confederation was stronger than it had ever been, not in spite of the chaos humans had brought, but because of it. They had learned to embrace change, to welcome innovation, to see problems as opportunities rather than obstacles. Besides, Dr. Vasquez added with a grin, it's not like we had a choice. It's not in human nature to look at a perfectly ordered galaxy and leave it perfectly ordered.
True, Captain Mitchell agreed.
We've never been very good at leaving well enough alone.
And thank God for that, said a voice behind them.
They turned to see Admiral Zixith approaching, carrying what appeared to be a bottle of something that sparkled in the station's artificial light.
Admiral, Captain Mitchell said, what brings you to the Academy?
I wanted to deliver this personally, the Admiral replied, holding up the bottle. It's a gift from the High Council, a token of appreciation for everything humanity has contributed to the Confederation.
What is it? Dr. Vasquez asked.
It's called Altarian Fire Wine, the Admiral explained. It's traditionally given to commemorate historic achievements. This particular bottle is over 3,000 years old. Captain Mitchell accepted the bottle with appropriate reverence.
Thank you, Admiral. This is incredibly generous.
Captain, 3 years ago I was convinced that humanity represented the greatest threat to galactic civilization. I was terrified that your chaotic approach to problem-solving would destroy everything we had built over 50 millennia.
And now? Dr. Vasquez asked.
The Admiral's 4 eyes sparkled with something that might have been amusement. Now I realize that I was right. Humanity is the greatest threat to galactic civilization as we knew it. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. How do you mean? The civilization we had built was stable, orderly, and peaceful, the Admiral explained. But it was also static. We had achieved perfection, or something close to it, and in doing so, we had stopped growing. We had stopped dreaming. We had stopped believing that tomorrow could be better than today. He paused, looking out at the bustling Academy campus. Humanity changed that. You showed us that perfection isn't an endpoint, it's a starting point. You taught us that there's always room for improvement. Always a better way to do things. Always new problems to solve and new challenges to overcome. And the prophecy? Captain Mitchell asked. The one about the terrible ones who shall bring chaos to order? Admiral Zixith laughed, which was a sound like wind chimes being played by a hurricane. Oh, the prophecy was completely accurate. You did bring chaos to our order. But it turns out that chaos isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes chaos is exactly what order needs to stay alive. He raised his own glass in a toast. To humanity, he said. The terrible ones who made everything better. As toasts went, it wasn't exactly flattering. But somehow it felt perfect. Later that evening, as Captain Mitchell sat in his quarters reviewing reports from the latest batch of Academy graduates, he reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. 3 years ago, he had been a test pilot for an experimental spacecraft, volunteering for what everyone assumed was a suicide mission. Now he was helping to run an academy that was training the next generation of galactic problem solvers. It wasn't the career path he had planned, but then again, very little in his life had gone according to plan. That, he supposed, was what made it interesting. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. The holographic display showed a communication from Earth, from President Warren herself. Captain Mitchell, the President's image said, I wanted to personally congratulate you and your crew on your latest achievements. The reports we've been receiving from the Confederation are, well, they're almost unbelievable. A galactic academy dedicated to teaching alien species how to think like humans? You've outdone yourself. She paused, smiling. I also wanted to let you know that we're preparing to send our first official diplomatic mission to join you. Ambassador Williams will be arriving next month with a full diplomatic staff and enough coffee to supply a small star system. Captain Mitchell laughed. Trust Earth to prioritize the really important things. But most importantly, the president continued, I wanted to tell you how proud we are of what you've accomplished. When you left Earth, you represented all of humanity. You still do. And you've shown the galaxy exactly what we're capable of when we put our minds to something. The message ended, leaving Captain Mitchell alone with his thoughts. Outside his viewport, the stars wheeled slowly in their ancient patterns. But somehow they seemed different now. Less distant, less alien, more like neighbors waiting to be met. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy, not as junior members of an established order, but as partners in an ongoing experiment. They had brought their chaos, their creativity, their stubborn refusal to accept the impossible, and in doing so, they had helped the galaxy remember what it meant to grow. The ancient prophecy had been right, in its way. Humanity was a threat to galactic civilization, but sometimes being a threat to the status quo was exactly what the universe needed. Captain Mitchell raised his glass of Altarian firewine to the stars and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new challenges, new opportunities to do the impossible. And somewhere in the galaxy, humans and aliens would be working together to solve them, one crazy idea at a time. It was, he thought, going to be a hell of an adventure. And in a galaxy that had forgotten what adventure felt like, that was perhaps the greatest gift humanity could give. The end.